All right, so today I wanted to talk about a topic that I brought up briefly yesterday, and this is Microstrategy. So on November 10th, I put out a tweet. Microstrategy will be a top 10 to 20 company in the world when Bitcoin goes over $1 million. First things first, if you get value out of this video, please like and subscribe. I really appreciate that. And I ran the numbers. And if you look at the numbers right now, Microstrategy is just under $50 billion market cap. They hold, I think, about 280,000 Bitcoin. So they're trading at about a 2.5 times premium. So if you do the math on that, even if they have the same amount of Bitcoin they have right now, which I think they're going to keep buying, in fact, I think they're going to keep buying as much as they possibly can. But if we just assume that they keep the exact amount of Bitcoin they have right now, and Bitcoin trades at $1 million US, that puts them at roughly a $700 billion market cap. There's only 9 companies in the world that have a higher market cap than that. So at $1 million, and again, this is right now, but 10 years from now, I would say maybe 20 companies, maybe 25 or 30 companies will have over that market cap. But that's still assuming that it'll trade for a 2.5 times premium and it'll have the same amount of Bitcoin. It's going to have more Bitcoin. So I think 10 or 20 years from now, MicroStrategy certainly is going to be a top 10 company. And it might even be a top 3 or top 5. It might even be the biggest company at some point. I think that that's perfectly realistic. And this is a topic that I've seen recently, and I think it's a really good, really interesting thing. Now, you have to keep in mind that this isn't necessarily an endorsement to go buy a whole bunch of it, because it certainly is risky. Like it certainly is extremely risky. That's something that needs to be acknowledged. But it all depends on Bitcoin. And I think the allure of MicroStrategy is to be able to buy it in a tax-free account, because you can't really buy physical Bitcoin and hold it in a TFSA or in a Roth IRA. There might be ways to do that, but even if there is, it's really, really inconvenient. It's not nearly as convenient as going and buying a stock or an ETF on an exchange. And the other reason that this is really appealing is I think that this is a much better opportunity than the ETFs. Because, number one, you're not paying the fees. And number two, MicroStrategy has performed way better than the ETFs. So why would you pay a fee to get less returns? It just doesn't make sense. So I think that this is an extremely good opportunity, and I think I didn't just throw this out there as a willy-nilly thing. Like I genuinely think this is going to happen. Like in the next 10 or 20 years, I think MicroStrategy will be a top 10 to 20 company in the world. Like I think that will happen. That is entirely dependent on Bitcoin, though, which obviously comes with the risk. It obviously will be volatile along the way, but I genuinely do think this is going to happen. So recently I said I also was going to wait to start buying some MicroStrategy, and I've since changed my mind on that. I think I'm going to start dipping my toes in and just dollar cost averaging a very small amount every month. And then if we do, more than likely we're going to get a pullback, later in the halving cycle. That's when I'll really start to load up for the next halving cycle, because I think that this is a really good opportunity. And not to mention too, like if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. Like I think that this is the perfect way. Again, my opinion, the perfect way to risk, 1 or 2, maybe 3% of your portfolio in that expected chance that you get these 10, 20, 30 times returns. Something that isn't talked about, again, is if you look at MicroStrategy, year to date, we are up 439%, and in the last 5 years, we're up 1,370%. Just out of curiosity, let's compare that to Nvidia and see, which I believe Nvidia is the best performing stock in the market the last 5 years, but it looks like MicroStrategy might actually have taken that. Let's check and see here. Nvidia is actually beaten it quite easily, 2,500%, but 1,400% is nothing to shake a stick at. I imagine that's probably the second, third. It's for sure going to be a top 5 company over the last 5 years. So that is my point here. That is my point that Bitcoin's up, what, roughly 10x in the last 5 years, but MicroStrategy's up even more than that. And that's the appeal here, that it's one thing to match the returns of Bitcoin. It's entirely another thing to beat the returns of Bitcoin. Like that is what is really impressive here. And I think that that's certainly possible to continue over the long term. Are you going to get 14x returns over every 5 years? Like that's not realistic. But this is another thing where I think you could easily beat the market. I think you can get I think it's realistic. I don't think it's necessarily for sure going to happen, but I think it's realistic to get 20-30% returns out of MicroStrategy over the next decade or two. Like if Bitcoin goes to $1 million, it's going to happen. Like it's going to happen, because especially if we go up to $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 a coin this cycle, which I think it's probably going to be somewhere in there. It might be borderline impossible. Like it might already be impossible. I mean, it isn't literally impossible, but at this point, it is pretty unlikely that another publicly traded company comes up with north of 300,000 Bitcoin. Like that is very, even if like an Apple or a Google, like if they tried to do it, they could do it. But if it goes up to $300,000-$400,000 a coin, that would be pretty tough. And if they did do that, that would send it up to probably $1 million. Like that could literally just in and of itself send it up to $1 million a coin. So people need to get, my opinion here is to get ahead of this trend, because I think it's inevitable that more publicly traded companies start buying, because this strategy that they are doing is clearly working. Like it's clearly working. Is it guaranteed to work? No, it isn't. But they had absolutely, like, people don't realize that they started doing this. I think it was almost 4 years ago, roughly 4 years ago. They had no trouble when Bitcoin was down 70%, 80%, whatever it was in 2020, like from the highs in 21 down to the lows. They weren't getting margin called. In fact, from what I could tell, they weren't even, I mean, they might not have been that far off, but I don't think they had any troubles. There wasn't any reports of them having any troubles. So Bitcoin would probably have to be down 90% before they would start to have troubles. They're already tens of billions of dollars up on their positions, or on their position. So I think that this is an absolutely brilliant strategy, like absolutely brilliant. Obviously, it comes with a lot of risk. I've already mentioned that, but I think that definitely is a fair point. But at the end of the day, my base case is Bitcoin is going into the millions of dollars a coin. And because of that, I think that this is an absolute no-brainer. I think it's an absolute no-brainer. I'd love to hear other people's thoughts on this, but to be fair, I think that very, very few people have actually thought this stuff through. Like, this is one of the many reasons that I'm still so bullish on Bitcoin, is that there's still so few people that have thought this through. I mean, I seen a chart the other day of U.S. home prices priced in Bitcoin, and the cost of housing priced in Bitcoin has gone down like 50 times. I think it might even be more than that, but over the last decade. And yet people see that, people hear that, and they just shrug their shoulders. Like how ignorant can you possibly be to see something like that and not be intrigued? And I've said, like, there's a lot of people out there that say, oh, like everybody's going to own Bitcoin someday. I've said time and time again, I don't believe that, because I think the majority of people are too ignorant. They'd rather be homeless than just admit they're wrong about things. And to each their own, let people make their decisions. But I think that it's realistic that 20, 30, 40% of people wake up. And right now we're at 1 or 2% of people. So we still have 10, 20, 30 X returns to go, in my opinion. Like I wouldn't even think about talking about, is it time to sell until we hit 1 million. Like, I know that's just an arbitrary number, but that's the arbitrary number that I go with. Like, everybody has their arbitrary number. Like, if Bitcoin went to $100 million tomorrow, I'm sure a lot of people that say, yeah, I'm never selling, they would sell at least some. So that is what I wanted to bring up today. Like I mentioned off the start there, I'd love to hear other people's feedback on that. But anyway, if you get value out of this video, please like and subscribe. Really appreciate that, like I mentioned, and stay tuned for more.